The empathy, kindness, generosity, respect, and inclusiveness that the poor live by in response to the harsher material conditions of their lives. We have no saints on this planet. We have no saints on this planet. We have no saints on this planet. We have no saints. We have no saints. No saints. No saints. No saints. Tipping point, Mike Boyle. Ringmaster, as always. And our show is titled Empowerment, Corruption, and Lies. And I would like to start with, of course, the subject. Those of you that follow this program, you know that I seem to figure out a way to bring in the subject of empowerment. Doesn't matter what we're covering, who I'm talking to. So that shouldn't surprise you. But what's the opposite of empowerment? Well, a number of things, but the most predominant thought that I have when I think of the opposite, or the polar opposite, would be the feeling of helplessness. So, have you felt helpless today? If not, congratulations. But the day isn't over. And I'd like to give you an example of something that in actuality is very mundane, because what I'm talking about is not life or death. But those of you who are like me and obsessed with this idea of fairness, then I think the story will have a certain resonance for you. So let's get started with that. It's tied to finance. Surprise, surprise. Subjects where helplessness has various permutations. In this particular case, it's an account that I have, and they sent a note and they wanted to validate that I am who I am. And they wanted some sort of proof. And without going into too many details, it was tied to a wish that they had all the answers they needed. So I wasn't quite sure what I was supposed to come up with. And I kept coming back to them and said, yeah, but you have all this information. I don't know. I don't understand why you keep coming back to me. And you know that feeling when you are conversing, quote unquote, with some sort of establishment, and you have the feeling that they didn't really read what you wrote. They cannot measure your frustration. And they continue to put on this happy face and asking the same question again, as if they were to ask the question often enough that you would finally comply. And so this is to be considered a customer service war of attrition. That's what I would call it. Your frustration mounts. Their lack of interest of your business becomes more and more apparent the longer this tirade goes on. And then you get to the point of where you say, well, I just don't want to deal with them anymore. And you realize that doesn't matter to them either. So then you start asking yourself the question, well, what actually does matter to them? And so I'm going through a situation right now. And I started thinking about my mental state vis-a-vis this dilemma that I'm in right now. And I realized that when I finally ceased doing business with this establishment, I have a sense of relief. I don't know if that's sad or scary or lamentable. Probably a few other descriptions I can come up with, but I know I'm not alone. There are a number of you who have felt the same way as I have. And for me, this only is a continuum of a feeling a number of us have, tied to what we can do and that empowerment that really is the basis of what drives us, or should be the basis of what drives us. And there is a concept that I guess I would call it even a worse pandemic of what we've been going through the last 3 years, and it's called learned helplessness. Learned helplessness. And learned helplessness is an idea that you have been so conditioned over the years to think that you are not capable of performing certain actions, that you're not able to reach whatever potential you might have at an early age, that you are not able to get a feeling of a certain satisfaction that really should be the quintessence of our existence here on this planet. And I'm going to give you a very typical rendition, one that I believe most of you can relate to, even if you were not directly afflicted, that you would be able to empathize being an outsider. And that is the one that we talk about quite often, way too late in the game. And that is the idea of women in math and science. Was anybody born thinking they can or cannot do something? I'm firmly convinced that in the inception, when we hit the ground running on day one, through that striving towards autonomy and mastery, that is the basis of learning for children and should be continued when we're out of adolescence, but I see that as being an endangered species. But regardless, let's go back to that time before schooling, that you feel that due to this autonomy and mastery that you were allowed to participate in, where nobody was setting any rules, they were happy you were able to make progress, And you were happy too. And so you thought at that time you could pretty much do anything. The world was completely open. And some of the ideas could be rather wild. And you never felt for a second that you were wasting your time having these dreams. And then, of course, schooling hit. And that's where we ended up on the conditioning conveyor belt. Where those things that you thought were right, you were set straight right away. They said, no, 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 no. That is not right. Wrong. Beep. Wrong again. And then after a while, after you've gone through this verbal abuse for a fair amount of time, not too dissimilar to the story I just told you about the helplessness in the customer service, when the wrong stops, you have a sense of relief. So then you decide for yourself, you're not going to put yourself in that situation where somebody can come back and say that you're wrong. And that's when I think about it, I was very fortunate. But when I think about this situation for a number of others, and I'm going to make an assumption, a number of you out there, that when you didn't get this verbal abuse, it was a relief. So you're happy they're not bombing today. And so that sets the tone of the way that you do things moving forward. You do not put yourself in a situation where you can get the buzzer. And of course that means you become very risk averse, which is truly the antithesis of learning. So let's go back to where I started. If you are a young girl and you have interest in science or math, and I'm firmly convinced that conditioning takes place today, often you will get the message, oh, that's nice, but actually, we don't expect it of you. So that means you are interested in showing your prowess. And then you get the feeling, well, nobody really cares. So it takes a great amount of tenacity to continue on that path, continuing with those passions, knowing full well that not only do people not care, but it gets even uglier the older you get. So you've gone past grade school, you've entered middle school or high school, and then you're stigmatized. Hey, what are you trying to do? You trying to show off here? That's male territory, so get off our turf. And then, of course, dealing with your own, said, why are you doing that? You're just alienating yourself from everyone. So that wrong becomes something much worse. And let's assume for our story that you still have the tenacity to continue. Because that idea of mastery has become a real driver. So you've reached university. And you are either in science or math, makes no difference. You might be the only one. So at least in high school, you had a healthy mix, male-female. And now, you're the only female. And boy, do you stick out. And you do not become the source of envy for the other males. You are a threat. Because just like the whites do not want to be outshone by blacks, unless we're talking about very specific professions where they're, by nature, they were born that way. They're supposed to be good in sports. They're supposed to be good in music. But anything else, we should be dominant. Well, we have the same situation here, don't we? Where men will say, young men will say, we cannot be outdone by this woman. And you would think that situation can't get any worse, but it can. So you've graduated and you are in the working world. Well, you know that bro culture that started a long time ago? I'm going to say probably even starts in grade school and then just becomes worse depending upon where you are. Well, that bro culture is in full force in the working world. Because you see, we're all into passive-aggressive behaviors. Our senses have been numbed because emotions just get in the way. And that latent aggressive behavior is part of that competition that we have to fight for our team within the corporate world. And so as a woman, within those environments, you really don't fit in. You really don't fit in. So if we were to bring that narrative back to the concept per se, learned helplessness, because of this conditioning, I gave you an example of the exception, but the rule looks a little bit different. Even if you can do it, you think you can't because you have been so conditioned that you cannot do it. You don't even try because this does not fit the picture that you have in your mind of who you are and the way you are supposed to be. So I talk about the situation on an individual level within our interactions, and I moved on to the actions that take place on a segmented level in our society. What about the whole enchilada? What about our societal helplessness? Is there such a thing of societal helplessness? Well, if we say that conditioning is taking place on a stratified level, well, doesn't that take place on a societal level? Within our cultural norms, our beliefs, our values, and the corresponding behavioral expectations that are expected within our society. Well, it's all kind of based on this prevailing narrative, the one that you are bombarded with daily in various forms, very often subtle. And of course, this depends on your society. Some are very blatant and not allowing for any type of critical thinking. Others are much more diabolical when it comes to suppressing critical thought. Where to have an idea that is separate from the mainstream means that you are a subversive, that you do not belong to this group. So then people that you know start performing this identity exorcism where they try to remove you from that group that you belong to. Or we will be thrown into categories instead of actually having a healthy dialogue. The easiest negation we have today is the concept of conspiracy theory. That if they don't agree with you, they will negate your facts in claiming that you are an adherent of some conspiracy theory. So it's another way to say, shut up. Very often, that control mechanism that we have in our society is very much tied to correspondence bias or the fundamental attribution error, which basically means that if we do something wrong, well, the situation made us to do it. But if the other does something wrong, well, they were born that way, and so we shouldn't expect anything else from them. And when you think about this idea of empowerment, and you think about the corollary being helplessness, and we think about the mechanisms we have within our society that keep us in line, it is not just the categorization of the others, but it's the justification that we use constantly. Because we will have our leaders come back and say, in spite of everything, our cause is just. And if you watch interactions, that are very much in the fore today, we will see both sides, or all sides, making the same claim. Our cause is just. And that claim of our cause being just, the justification, becomes the wild card that we use continuously so that we can always claim our innocence. So that we can claim this is our destiny. This is our eternity. And regardless what happens, we remain innocent. Emil Durkheim talks about concept of social facts, and maybe a bit of information on Durkheim before I continue. He was truly one of the fathers of sociology, together with Max Weber and Charlie Marx, one of the Marx brothers. He was part of that scene as well. And Durkheim talked about this idea of social facts, removing the group, aka the society, from the individual, making the claim that the social fact is something that would be, with a few exceptions, universal. These are tendencies that we can note or observe within human beings that are all based upon this idea of us as a group and how we are. And within this idea of social facts, this can be broken down into stratification, either looking at things through the ethnicity, or looking at this concept that should be much more debated than it is today, and that's the idea of the nation state. And then our individual tribes or our identities that may or may not fall within the ethnicity. It might be much more specific. And so within all these various groups, we have that narrative, starting with correspondence bias, or the fundamental attribution error that, well, the other side, they were born that way. And if we do something wrong, well, the situation more or less forced us to take these actions. And I think there's no better example of this way of thinking when looking at civilians at a time of war. And unfortunately, we all know about what's taking place about 1,000 kilometers to our east here of Vienna. So I would argue it's not too dissimilar to the example I gave with the financial institution where I started the show, where you are getting bombarded by these messages that have nothing to do with a dialogue that you're attempting to foster, and you're bombarded and bombarded and bombarded and bombarded and bombarded. And there is a strategy behind this bombardment that when the bombs stop, you have that sense of relief. And you always stay a little bit edgy because of the psychological damage that all that bombardment has actually inflicted on you. And you come to the conclusion that sometimes it's just easier to be comfortably numb. So this all becomes a survival tactic. And as it is with most things in life, we fall within a routine, and then we are no longer aware of where we landed. You have entered the realm of Radio Tipping Point, and our show today is titled Empowerment, Corruption, and Lies. And we see through the years how that conditioning has removed that unique character that we did have at one time. Unique at birth, unique as group, unique as destiny. And we know the story from the late 18th century, starting with a country like France, where most people didn't even speak French, but they were convinced of their cause, which wasn't theirs. But after a while, they forgot that. For the most part, we had a couple of exceptions. But we don't talk about that. And they're just terrorists anyway. So if we show our unique identity, we are considered to be terrorists. And if we look at this permutation that's taken place, moving from a civilization to a nation state that still might be considered to be a civilization, or a group of countries could be considered to be a civilization. What does that actually infer when we talk about civilization? That infers that we are civilized. So within this concept of the constitutive other, the other who we have jointly decided is not us. So if we are civilized, what are they? Well, of course, you know what the answer is going to be. They're not civilized. So when you dig deeper into this concept of the constitutive other, we say that we are white because they are black. We are Christians because they are Muslims. We are men because they are women. So if we look at this linear progression to be found within those examples that I gave, how do we How do we prove the validity of our statements? Well, you can consider all of this to be a reinforcing loop. So if A means B, then B needs to be an A. So they are black because we are white. They are Muslims because we are Christians. They are women because we are men. Can you think of any other examples of where that's taking place today? We are Russians because they are Ukrainians. And we see where the inverse is also taking place. We are Ukrainians because they are Russians. So if we were to look at these concepts, if we look at civilization perhaps in a more general frame of mind, not necessarily the one I was referring to with being civilized, which has a very, very, very strong meaning. But if we look at a civilization where the focus is no longer on those things that we find within the nation state, for example, language would be a typical one. I think religion is probably more tied to civilization. In fact, I don't think so. I know so. There are certain customs that will exist within that civilization. And within those customs, we will have the corresponding rituals that are often tied to a civilization, with those rituals being the glue that holds the civilization together, because that's the way that we do things. We are us because they are them. They are them. And so we see a very interesting situation in Ukraine right now. Because part of what's taking place is that they are trying to free themselves from that civilization that they do not want to be identified with. And this is a real struggle because we have to remember that nation state is a political entity that may or may not be tied to some sort of reality. And I'm sure I'll make a lot of friends with this statement. But in many respects is not natural, often arbitrary, and if we look at the different types of ethnicities that are either excluded or included from this nation state, we start to realize how arbitrary all this is. So within that of what's taking place to the east, the constitutive other is really, we do not belong to this group, we are part of that group. And we see it started with religion, the break in religion, where even, I assume starting next year, that Christmas in the Ukraine will no longer be on the 6th of January, but rather will be on the 25th of December. We are us because they are them. And we say it within language. We speak this because they speak that. And because of that dualistic conditioning that we have gone through for so many years, we say we belong to this group because we don't belong to that group. And I ask you, who came up with this rule that you can only belong to one group? Oh, I get it. You're either producing or consuming. And it's okay to run around with a split personality because it's two aspects on the same side of the coin. Because if we were to look at the other side of that coin, we go past the production consumption conundrum, then what would be the content or the value to be found on the other side of that coin? What do you think it would be? What do you think? Maybe it would be you and your uniqueness. And the various components that make us us. A number of years ago, Muhammad Ali was giving a commencement address at Harvard, I believe. And a number of the students, they say, Muhammad Ali, give us a poem. Muhammad Ali, give us a poem. Muhammad Ali, give us a poem. And so he did. You know how the poem went? Me, we. That was it. That was the entire poem. And I don't think in my entire life I have found a statement being made that had so much value tied to two words. It showed you how profound Muhammad Ali actually was. And to quote from another source of inspiration, this came from a fortune cookie that I devoured in a midnight raid in our sweets cabinet. You are not born to act the way others want you to. You are not born to act the way that others want you to. Observation from a fortune cookie. So how do we arm ourselves against this helplessness that I've been talking about on various levels, from an individual level, from a stratified level within that tribe or group that we belong to, and from that social fact perspective. Let's start with the constitutive other, which really doesn't fall into this typical narrative that we've had through our conditioning. I am me because you are you. So what does that actually entail when I say, I am me because you are you? Is that the same as the other examples I gave? Not by a long shot. Why? Because for me to make that comment or that proclamation, yes, it's a proclamation, I am me, that infers that you have faith in yourself. That infers that you accept yourself for who you are. That states that being me doesn't take anything away from you being you. And that's probably the most powerful part of that whole constellation. Then we start to understand that me being me and you being you is not a zero-sum game. That it doesn't take anything away from me when you are you. And to defend Durkheim a little bit, because after all, he was going through uncharted territory. But one of the major tenets of what Durkheim was saying was this idea of the collective consciousness, which basically states that the sum is greater than the parts. So let's go back to our example. I am me because you are you. And if we follow Durkheim's thought process here, that because I am me and you are you, that together we are much greater than me or you. Back to Ali. Me, we. Me, we. Me, we. I think I've come up with the magic elixir, the ultimate freedom that allows us to escape the learned helplessness, escape the conditioning, escape the societal pressure, of being considered a recalcitrant. And that freedom lies in the fact that people perform actions not because they are intended to keep you in place, although that is unfortunately very often what happens. And I'm not saying we don't have the Wizard of Oz trying to perform these actions in the background, but this is all happening on a meta level. But if you think about the comment, we are men because you are women, what it actually means is that we don't have enough faith in ourselves unless we are able to create you as being the enemy. So what do you think the ultimate freedom is? What if we decide on an individual level, on a group level, that we refuse to be the enemy? That infers that you are taking the weapon out of their hands. You are neutering the other side because you are not playing the role that they had constituted to you. And if you think about it, it's their need, not yours. So we have a choice in whether we play that role or not, right? So here's food for thought, something that perhaps you would like to dwell upon up till our next tete-a-tete. That the next time you are being accused of something, and the immediate feeling that you have is that, damn, this is not just, and I need to fight. Well, and I'm really the last one to talk about because I find myself falling into this role over and again under this instinct reaction that we have, fight or flight. So I go ahead and fight. And I'm not purporting to flight. What I'm saying, there's a third way, neither fighting nor flighting, and that is ignoring. That we think to ourselves, this wasn't really addressed towards us. Or continue concentrating on the individual. This was not addressed to me. This is a problem the other person has, and it would be great if they were able to solve it, but you know what? They're the only ones who could do it for themselves, right? So that means the only real defense we have is to proclaim its irrelevance. That it does not belong to me. It does not affect me. They are not talking to me. They might think they're talking to me, and in fact, I suspect that had somebody else shown up in that situation, they would have gotten the same message. So what makes this message applicable to me? Actually, nothing. Nothing. So I'd like you to think about this one. That maybe, just maybe, the ultimate form of empowerment is to show for yourself the irrelevance of that's taking place around you, and you continue on your way, and the shield that you have is basically declaring the statements, the actions, the intentions of the others to be null and void. Because by acknowledging it, you start to realize that's all part of the conditioning. So the next time you hear the news, say, this does not pertain to me, that you hear aggression around you, said, this was not addressed towards me. I don't need to pass judgment because this is not for me. And I'd be keen to hear how that one works for you. Not saying this is easy, but damn, what's the alternative? I would say JFDI. As always, the 57 minutes go way too quick, and I am reaching the end. I'd like to thank you for allowing me to indulge in this rant. Hope you can find a sliver of value, and look forward to being together with you very soon.